think what's shifted is some of the permission to speak about the mental health struggles. I think what hasn't really fully shifted yet in athletics, certainly, but even in high schools and middle schools and corporate professional spaces is the infrastructure. So we're better at having conversations probably than we are at building systems that can actually catch these people before they hit a wall.
Dillon, welcome to the middle.
Megan, thanks so much. Yeah, what an honor to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. And I want to ask you kind of right off the bat, we talked before this call about celebrities are talking more and more, especially celebrity athletes, about mental health. You have LeBron James, Simone Biles, Michael Phelps. They've all come out and talked about their own battles. And we've started to call that a revolution. Is it a revolution from where you sit?
Gosh, what a good question. And I think it's true that we are seeing a change in some of our willingness or ability to talk about mental health and mental performance, whether it's with adolescents and kiddos. I mean, I think there's more and more discussion about that, all the way up into elite athletics and professional sports. And perhaps, too, some of what we're seeing, I think about women's gymnastics in this last Olympics. These are young women. They're not,
Yes.
45-year-old adults that have lived a whole life. And so I think the conversation is necessary and it's inevitable based on some of the trends we're seeing in mental health. But I think we feel it. We feel a shift in conversations happening and evidence our athletes that we put on pedestals feeling the mental performance crush. And so we feel it, but I think we need to nuance it a little bit. I think what's shifted is some of the permission to speak about the mental health struggles. Simone Biles, like you mentioned, Megan, walking away in Tokyo, and Michael Phelps talking a bit about some depression. The NBA has had a number of signature players who have come out more and more talking about it. These are watershed moments in a lot of ways because they give a language to something that's probably always been there, but not always was it given attention or permission to be able to speak about. I think what hasn't really fully shifted yet in athletics, certainly, but even in high schools and middle schools and corporate professional spaces is the infrastructure. So we're better at having conversations probably than we are at building systems that can actually catch these people before they hit a wall. And so what systems can we build in place to catch them when we need to? I work at the Air Force Academy here, and so we have a couple of military service academies in the United States, and this is one of them. So we see young athletes, and we call them cadets. They're more willing to come in the door than they were, I would say, 5 years ago. And it's because of people like Simone Biles and Michael Phelps putting language to something that must be talked about, and that's real for sure. But willingness to talk and then having, I think, the right supports in places where they need to be to receive those conversations are probably two different problems.
And I love what you said about these elite athletes giving language. We talked to an Olympian in our first season who I think Michael Phelps called it when he started talking about the post-Olympic crash or the post-Olympic depression is what he called it. And this Olympian, he was an alpine skier. He said, that's what happened to me. He'd been to 2 Olympics at that point. And he said, I didn't have any words for it. I didn't know why I was feeling or acting the way I was. And he read when Michael Phelps started to come out and talk about it. And he said, that's me. I saw myself in what he was saying, but I never knew how to describe it. And I never made that connection of, oh, maybe that's what it is. So I think you're spot on that as even maybe a start of a revolution, it is just that verbiage. Sometimes we just need that language to say, okay, I can name it now.
That's right. Yeah. And Megan, I think the language does help give them permission to be able to speak about it from a performance domain, not from a deficit domain. So, gosh, if I can talk about what it feels like to be under pressure and not performing where I wanted to perform, or actually maybe performing really well, and now I have this back end after an Olympics or a Super Bowl or whatever it is, a conference championship, it's kind of like, okay, now what? Putting language into it begins to grow permission to talk about it because we've got a structure or scaffold that we can lock it into. Oh, it makes sense now to talk about this.
Yeah. You mentioned you work at the Air Force Academy, and I want to get into that in a little bit, but do you think there is a positive downstream flow that we're talking about mental health with younger individuals and younger athletes?
Okay, good question. I think the answer to that is yes. I think it's a double-edged sword. I think we must talk about more and more and more um, what it is to perform optimally, what it is to perform well, to be a healthy, flourishing human being. And so this means we hydrate and we nutrate. This means that we exercise. We have training programs that we periodize. So when we have a real stressful workout on our body, the next day, maybe we have some downtime so we can recover. And I think historically, we haven't done a great job at recognizing that the brain is a muscle to be trained in the same way. So we periodize rest and recovery intervals. So, talking more and more then about mental performance, mental health as a variable of overall athlete or student or cadet performance is necessary. We must do this. I think mental health actually flows from brain health, but we don't think about it that way. Someone doom scrolling TikTok at 2 a.m. and then says they're anxious. Like, I mean, maybe. I also think you probably just need to go to sleep, you know? So I think the double edged sword is this: we need to talk about mental health more and more, and we need to load it into performance domains, just like we would, yeah, like a VO2 max and a DEXA scan. So the data of the body. At the same time, I think when we talk about mental health, like it's this scary kind of thing that sneaks up on us and surprises us, I don't think we do service to the training phases that make us more durable or more able to perform well in spaces that really ask a lot of us psychologically.
You kinda just mentioned that, of we can measure so many things like VO2. You can measure if you're a runner, you can measure your splits, We have so much quantitative data that folks, even everyday athletes, you don't need to be an elite athlete to have metrics around, you might wear a smartwatch and have all that at your fingertips. How do you measure mental health?
Gosh, there have been so many attempts to try and measure mental health. And I think data is powerful. It's a complement to the clinical conversation, that kind of in the room conversation. And it's a complement to the coach's eye. Coach knows their athletes. They can see her, they can see him and say, something's up.
Mhm.
I don't think. I don't think data replaces that. I think it's important. There are some biometric data that give us insights into the psychology of our athletes. So HRV could be one of them, kind of trending HRV data, sleep quality, some recovery curves based on different methodologies of like calculating what recovery might be. There's some real neat data on like force plates and like jumping
Mhm.
and how much sway we have as we stand on a force plate. These give us some insights into what we might call like a vestibular recovery. Is the body and the brain syncing up well, or are they really tired and gassed? But that doesn't get great insight into the actual mental health or mental performance of our athletes. And so, one way we try and get after that at the academy is what we call an RPE, rate of perceived exertion. We
Okay.
ask our athletes to complete on their phones an RPE. We ask a lot of questions about mental health. So, hey, you just went through a training phase in practice. And how cognitively taxing was this practice? So
Mhm.
maybe they're loading in new set pieces or new plays. Maybe coach is really getting after them. Why were you there and where should you have been? We also ask how emotionally taxing was this? Maybe it was a game or practice. How emotionally taxing? We're asking questions about sleep quality, not just quantity. So how many hours you slept is important, but how rested did you feel when you woke up that morning? And then when we get that data built over time, we start to have a nice little like kind of fluctuation or longitudinal data that shows us the ebbs and the flow of how an athlete might feel throughout a season, throughout a year. And when we see some nuance in between there, some changes to what we might expect, it's a great time for us to just check in on them and say, hey, how you doing today? Let's do a check in, see how things go. There's a couple other measures we may use, and I mean, we can get into them now if you'd like to, but some more specific um, instruments that ask questions about performance anxiety, ask about return to play. So if we have an athlete on like an ACL recovery, how confident are you that you can post and pivot on that leg? And those all just load into this larger picture. But data on its own doesn't tell us everything. So if we just take all of these metrics, we've, I think, run a risk that we're not telling the whole story. So we have to then tell the story with the data. It's just the data is a whole bunch of different colors of paint, and we get to be the one to paint that picture to make the most sense for that athlete, that coach, the athletic trainer, et cetera.
Do you collect that for with all the athletes at the academy? Is that every sport? Every practice, every game?
Yeah, Megan, we do. Now, different sports based on the need of the sport, the demands of the sport, or the size of the team, and Megan, coach buy-in. Different teams have a different level of engagement, but yes, we are always gathering data on all of our athletes across all teams.
I love it. We've kinda talked about the current state of mental health and athletics right now. I wanna quickly get your thoughts on kind of where we came from because, again, so long I think it was taboo to talk about mental health. We've talked to athletes. We talked to Patty Gamble earlier this season, who was a football player, a European football player for Nottingham Forest, and who said, I didn't want to talk about my mental health to my coaches because they're the ones that are creating my contracts. I don't want to give them a reason to pay me less or not give me as much playing time or anything like that. So, and you like you mentioned that you're at the Air Force Academy. You actually have been served in the military, which I think both cultures, I'm gonna say, have a bit of this bury it mentality of just push it down, just keep going. Where does that come from? In both, maybe in both cultures, but and why is it so hard to shake?
I think it comes from a real honest, a real intentional desire to show up well in moments that matter. I mean, it is a survival logic that really makes sense in the context of that milieu, of that high demand environment, whether it's sport or operational. So I think in that way, like in combat or in competition, you really you can't afford to be consumed by emotions in the moment. Um, Cultures build a norm around that suppression then. And then we in sport and in military for sure, in aviation, this is true, we reward people who have done that the best, who suppress all of those things the best. And the problem that suppression as like kind of a tactical skill gets confused with suppression as a whole way of life. And so there's a distinction that I think has to be made here. A really good athlete, a really good aviator, a really good operator can um, compartmentalize skillfully and intentionally. They are able to turn off all of the other things and go do the job in the moment that they must do that job. We want, in that way, high quality compartmentalization. If someone's jumping out of an airplane, trying to take over a hostile airfield so that then we can put our own assets landing in that airfield, we don't need them worried about their dog back home or if their kiddo made it to school that day. We want them to be able to fully dial into that moment. And so whether we call it suppression or the bury it mentality or we call it compartmentalization, I think it's a tactical skill, but it does get confused with like a way of life, a way of being. So the person who can compartmentalize under fire is celebrated, possibly should be, but over time that message becomes something like that is who you should be all of the time, the strong, silent type. And I think it then gets hard to shake because it's at the identity level. It becomes core to the identity of a service member or an athlete. And coaches maybe internalize that too. So it's not just, don't talk about your feelings. It's actually more like, this is what it is to be a warrior. This is what it is to be an athlete or be strong. To be a competitor, you basically don't have emotion or feeling. I will tell you, Megan, I think our coaches anymore are challenging that norm and they feel like welcoming or honoring the whole aspect of our athletes is critical to their overall performance. So I'm consistent with, our last question on a shift in discussion. I think our coaches are much more willing and able to talk about it.
What does this version of suppress it, bury it, all that. What does that produce long term in terms of mental toughness? We talked about the identity, but I think especially for, again, our listeners who are not professional athletes or maybe are casual athletes, who don't have the resources that the Air Force Academy has or pro athletes do in their training programs. What does that produce long term if it's not corrected or adjusted?
It produces fragility. Megan, I often challenge someone that really has adopted a fake it till you make it mentality as a sign of strength. I'm going to show up to this environment knowing that there's a risk, that I don't have everything it takes, and I'm going to fake it and hope that I make it eventually. And they sort of conceptualize it, right? Like, oh, I'm brave and bold and strong by pushing into environments that are a bit outside my skill set. And I would say, yes, that's true. Congratulations. Let's go do more of that. The problem is tying identity to our performance and showing up to environments where we maybe don't have what it takes, whether it's our tactical skill or our technical training, our physiologic training or psychologic training, and we try and fake it. It means that we are like really aversive to feedback. We're afraid that the feedback will lay bare the reality that I don't have what it takes. We develop, I think, patterns or behaviors that are not optimal for our best performance because we don't ask the hard questions. We don't put ourselves in circumstances that show what I do and do not know with an openness. That's a real fragility on that side. And I say that with respect, certainly for what those people have built, for what these athletes or operators do, because the same capacity that makes someone elite is actually, I think, the thing that breaks them when the performance stops or when their identity that they've been carrying no longer fits. And I think a curse of a high performer is like we do well today, and then next week we feel we must do well plus something. And so each day it asks a little bit more of us. And so working with people who are absolute elite performers, they're decorated and they're accomplished, and man, they are hard drivers. But they hit a wall. Maybe it's post deployment or post retirement or an injury. They had no real framework for who they were outside of performance. And that bury it, that compartmentalizing suppression version of toughness doesn't actually build resilience at all. It's like, I don't know, it's more like a dam, I guess. And then that dam gives way and it leaks all over the place. And they haven't developed the skill set to pull it all back in. And so it's real fragile. And I think in that way, durability, and I love to talk about durability. I probably use that term far more than I do resilience. Durability requires an active, continual processing, not a suppression.
You said durable, and that is a really specific word choice.
Mhm.
What does that capture more than resilience or more than perseverance or more than any of the other words that tend to get used with mental health?
I think there's something about like a mental durability, like a durable mindset that says, I welcome stress as an inevitable piece of life and also as a force multiplier for my performance. And I am built, my framework, my psychological framework is built to be able to handle and tolerate some of the stressors of life or my job or my sport or my fill in the blank. I've done the work, I've put in the reps to build a durable system that can handle the stressors. And so it's no longer wondering like, when is the next wave going to come that will absolutely take me out? And am I resilient enough to bounce back from that adversity? It's more like, gosh, I know these things are going to come. And so I've built a deep rooted, stable system that can withstand the pressures and the waves. And there's going to be some movement. Yes. We're going to like bend and we're going to feel some of the pains of those moments. But the durable aspect of my mindset and my emotions are trained. They are so well like a part of the system that in the moment I actually don't even get knocked down so much anymore as I endure. I stand in. And then when I look back on those circumstances, instead of saying, "Wow, yeah, that was tough, and I'm glad I bounced back," instead of saying that, I say, gosh, my behavior, the decisions I made, the words I used, the performance that came about is so authentic to me, and I'm really proud of it. I did exactly what my training said I should have done or needed to do, and I can stand on top of those moments now in a way that really feels native to who I am. I am proud of those moments because of my ability to stand in those moments and be the person that I expected myself to be as a parent. I mean, that's like my new, my phase of life now is like reflecting back on just a day or two ago. Okay, was I durable enough as a dad in that moment to be able to like be calm and cool and clear? Am I proud of the consistency that which my kiddos can see me now? Not like, oh, do I get angry dad today? Or do I get work dad today? So having a durability to be able to stay true to ourselves in those moments on the pitch, on the field, jumping out of a plane, et cetera, I think is critical.
And if I remember when Simone Biles was talking about her experience in Tokyo, that was part of what she was talking about was like, this is authentic to me. I this was something that this wasn't, anyone forcing her into it, withdrawing. That was just her being knowing her body, knowing herself, and saying, "What's best for me is this." You talked about stress, and I think a lot of times stress is, framed to us as a or as a threat. Like stress, you're doing something wrong, or it's a sign that you're doing something wrong, as opposed to maybe saying it's just a challenge. It's just something that is inevitably gonna pop up. But viewing it as a challenge is really easy to say and a lot harder to do. So what are these little cognitive shifts that you've been talking about, being more durable, changing your mindset on things? What do those actually feel like in the moment?
Increasing our durability in moments that are cognitively and emotionally taxing comes from putting in reps with stress. The science on this is really pretty clear. It's called the challenge threat appraisal model. There's a couple different ways of rack and stacking that. But basically, like how we label our psychological response to stress really dramatically changes its effect on us. And so anxiety and excitement, for example, they really have almost an identical physiologic signature. So our heart rate goes up, our breathing is elevated, our attention gets heightened. But the difference is the story that we tell ourselves and trying to make sense of what it means. When I'm sore after a session in the gym, or I reach a set of failure on a set, the story I tell myself is, "Good, Dylan, we're getting stronger today." But for some reason, on the psychologic domain, if I'm feeling a little worn out or a little anxious or like I'm getting jittery or I can't quite get my thoughts sorted out because there's just too much going on, I'm viewing that as like a problem. So I think that story is really important. The difference of like what our brain tells us about what it means. We have to train that. We train the ability to tell that story. And so practically, Megan, to your point, practically, I think one of the first moves is awareness, recognizing, okay, I'm activated. And doing that before we decide what the activation actually means is really important. So, dude, I am feeling it. Is this a sign that like I'm anxious and I'm not going to do well? And yes, failure is inevitable. Or is this actually a sign that like, dude, my body is ready and hopped up, and so like, let's go. I'm excited about this. So recognizing it, bringing awareness is that first step, and then the second is exposure and evidence. Um, we build the ability to welcome stress the same way that we do our physical capacity. So, like incrementally with repetition. If I had never deadlifted before, Megan, and you are a world renowned deadlifter, and you would never put a bar at my feet loaded with 220 pounds and tell me to move that through space. You teach me the form and function of muscle movement first. We would get how to move in space, and then we'd move under load incrementally with repetition. And the cognitive domain should be the exact same way, but we very often walk into those settings expecting somehow the brain's just going to figure it out, which is problematic. So every time we step towards something hard and come out on the other side, we're kind of like depositing into a cognitive bank that says, I can do this. I can do hard things. I can perform well here. And over time, our brain, just like our body adapts, our brain stops defaulting to a threat mode, and moves more into a performance mode. But we really have to build the evidence. Again, I can't deadlift well under load unless I've trained how to do the form and function of muscle movement. And so we have to build the repetitions of psychologic muscle movement. And we can't often like just think our way there. We have to do it. We have to do our way there. And the doing then is bringing awareness and then exposing to stressors with evidence that says, oh yeah, man, okay, I can do this. Here we go again.
You build these frameworks, you build these systems, you work one-on-one with, athletes now, like I said, you have worked in the past with one-on-one with, F-35 pilots and special operations. So and you're also working inside, and keep me honest on all of this, you're working inside a system at the US Air Force Academy that's trying to measure all of this as well. It's the Human Performance Lab. What does all that mean in plain terms? What are you guys doing?
Yeah, good. So an integrated performance team is really the way of the future for high performing athletics and operational teams. These have things like a performance dietitian, a physiologist, strength conditioners, athletic trainers, sports psychologists, and data scientists. I would say those are the kind of the key grouping of a performance team that integrates with one another. And across those domains, we are able to specialize. I mean, I'm a psychologist, not a nutritionist. And yet, if I'm working with an athlete that gets like the bubble guts before like a big tournament, well, me and the dietitian are going to tag team that meeting so we can talk about what sorts of fueling strategies are easier on the GI system, but also what are the psychologic and behavioral components to overactivation that make you feel like you're going to throw up or something else.
Yeah.
And then we also are able to pull on some data, watching how the body moves in practice sessions versus a game, heart rate, breath rate, these sorts of things that tell us some information about what's happening with this particular athlete in real time. So we integrate all of this information, and the experience for a coach or for an athlete is not necessarily like, oh, I have to make an appointment with my psychologist, and then I have to go make an appointment with my dietitian, and then I got to go. Instead, it's like this comprehensive team that presents this package of, hey, here's what we're doing and why we're doing it. It's easily applied. It's really, we call it native to the system, meaning that the athlete doesn't have to think that hard about how to apply what we're talking about because it just fits the natural role of what they're doing together.
Mhm.
And I mean, I just full transparency, we're not, we are continuing to refine this. So how this
Yeah.
looks real time based on the athlete or the need can look different, but it's amazing work being done.
Well, you're using data. I mean, just like with athletes, you're using data to make it better.
Hmm. Hmm. That's right. Yep.
Speaking of data, sometimes athletes, I think, can feel and maybe should feel that they know their body the best. They know their
Mm.
mind the best. And then the data might tell them something different. So, have you seen that? And how do you work with them through that?
Yeah, and this is especially relevant with the Whoops and the Auras and the Apple Watches. I have those. I think it's interesting to track. But the black box of how any one company tracks on recovery or sleep quality is inconsistent. We can't pull data from a Whoop for this athlete and an Aura for that athlete and an Apple Watch for that athlete and make much sense of it. I think in the world of too much information, which is where we live now, Megan, folks get too stuck in that space. And so I would say more often than not, instead of asking for more data from our athletes, we're telling them you should just take your watch off. Let's go 2 months without the aura.
2
And
months.
yeah, could you believe it? Could you do that? Let's do 2 months and let's just see, like, can we build our own interoceptive awareness? Can we build our own awareness of our own bodies without having some external system telling us, where we're at? And at the same time, we're not abdicating our responsibility to have some objective, concrete, quantitative data. So we still have some, yeah, we're still looking at like what is their performance in the lift session today versus yesterday or last week. But we're not necessarily giving that to the athlete as readily because where we focus very often drives how we view the world. And if we are focused on what did my watch tell me about today's performance and it's not what we expected, it will tank our ability to show up the next day in a quality way because we're letting that story arc get written by something that is only one little piece. So to answer your question real specifically, Megan, it is true that very often, more often than not, we're prescribing almost that they remove some sort of biometric data tracker until we kind of like rehabilitate their ability to track on my own. Yeah, how am I feeling outside of this little thing telling me I am or am not am or am not recovered?
I have gone through phases where I don't wear my Apple Watch, and it's very, like, feast or famine for me. I either wear it and I love it, or I am so sick of it, and I just wanna take it off for a month or 2, which then, of course, when I want to go back and look at, how look at my year, I'm like, "Oh, I had these, like, 2-month periods where," so, like, I'm a big fan of tracking my mileage, just pure mileage, and then I'm always be like, "Oh," and so then I'm like, "Yeah, I did 1,000 miles last year," because I have, like, 6 months of data that's not there.
But isn't it so interesting that we use those as ways to validate, like, did I get it? Did I put in the reps today? Can I feel good about myself this year when like the year in review pops up and I can validate all of the mileage moved or my resting heart rate is down, 2 BPMs over the last 2 months or something. And I think there's goodness to that. Gosh, there's so much goodness to using outcomes to validate the hard work we've putting in. But when life is almost exclusively predicated on the outcome and not on the process, we lose sight of the present moment. There's a part of me, I do not wear any biometric, like, so I don't wear my watch or a ring, when I sleep. And there is a part of me very often that wants that data. I also, like, just don't totally trust it. I don't think there's any real performance need that I have right now. And so I choose actively to not wear it. I will just separate and distance from any and all technology the moment that I'm in my bed. Yeah, and it's true though, to your point, Megan, I still do wonder, like, gosh, what would it say? Yeah, what was last night like? I've got a bit of a cold today, so how does that impact? I'm just curious, but I don't wanna touch it.
I will say I'm the same way. I don't wear my Apple Watch when I sleep, and every once in a while, I have been like, "Man, I wonder what is going on? Am I sleeping well? What's my heart rate? All that." But it's never enough to actually charge my Apple Watch it because it's charging overnight. It's never enough to get me to change that habit of charging it at a different time of day, so I can do it. So we've talked about like athletes getting the microphone, so to speak, on talking about mental health and having that expanded to not just elite athletes, but downstream to others. And we've celebrated them. But telling your story, I think, especially in that with that media scrutiny around you, and actually being supported through that can be two very different things. So, what does it take to actually build these systems for the athletes so that they do start in the future to feel more supported, as opposed to maybe coming out after the fact and talking about it?
The system has to make sense for the environment they're working in, and that is hard. It's easier said than done. If we try and just throw more resources, so like, oh man, here's a clinic, here's an office, and it's going to be open like prolonged hours so you can just walk in, come and see us. Very often they don't come in because it's like, well, I don't, what purpose is this? Where is the goodness? Do you even know if I have to show up and explain what I'm going through before you even can make sense of the situation? That's probably just not worth it. It's added bandwidth that I don't have. Becoming a part of the system then I think is critical. And so we do that well. We want to be a part of the squadron, we'll call it. We want to know and feel the cultural norms and kind of like variables at play on any given day for what it is to be embedded in that location. And then when we're able to speak to it before the athlete has to bring it up, they say, oh, this guy understands what I'm going through. They get it. And so we can, with some real clarity and honesty, we can talk about what's truly going on rather than trying to, for the athlete, trying to explain what's happening.
No, and I think you hit the nail on the head, which is embedded. And I think we're seeing that more even in professional sports, having teams. I think the NBA now requires like licensed mental health
Yeah.
professionals
And the
on
NFL
every.
too is doing it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think this idea of not, to your point, not making it a, hey, the resource is there, but it's on you to go
That's
seek it
right.
out. It's on you to have that recognition. It is becoming much more embedded into just this is what we do and this is how we operate. And these are the people that are here to your point earlier, whether they're alongside nutritionists and physical trainers and
Mhm.
the coaching staff, they're just a part of that. They're not kind of separated down the hall.
That's
Um,
right. And when I start to say things similar to their strength conditioner, so what the strength conditioner says when they need to gut out one more rep, when I'm able to start to say those things too in a really authentic way, it doesn't feel like I'm just making stuff up or like trying to pretend, but I'm there watching these sets and reps and I'm a part of that system. Or they've even seen me in the gym and I'm not lifting what they're lifting, but I'm still there putting in the work. You know, Megan, that's where the real connection happens. Not only do I kinda like this guy, I see him putting in the work, and we're very similar in that way, but I can trust him. Just like an athlete has to put in the work to validate they have what it takes to show up in that arena and compete, I must do the same thing, but my arena is now performance psychology. And so I have to put in the work and show the reps to be able to show up in quality ways to match them and meet them in places that they need it.
what needs to change at a broader cultural level, not just in sports? We've talked about armed services, not just in those areas, for these kind of mental health conversations to actually produce progress instead of, as you were saying earlier, just awareness of it. I think we're in that awareness stage now. So what needs to start changing to shift that along in this process?
I mean, I think as a society, awareness can't be the finish line. we've been raising awareness with campaigns, I don't know, for like what, 15 years or so, but suicide rates and burnout rates and anxiety prevalence are probably not moving the way they should be. So I think awareness without access to the psychologist, without accountability for what that psychologist is doing in terms of their integration into the system. And by way then of integrating into the system, that psychologist destigmatizes what it is to get the help. I think that's really a structural level change. Moving performance psychology out of the ivory tower of the therapist office that takes 6 months to get into and has insurance copays, et cetera, but embedding them into like a performance team, I think is the way to do it. Leaders must then accept that psychology is a piece of holistic athlete and operator performance. And there's probably some vulnerability that has to come with that. I think some of our leaders will reject psychology because it touches parts of them that are like, yeah, I'm still suppressing. So I think like, in the military or I guess with a team, there's a difference between a commander or a coach that says, you can go talk to somebody. Sure, go talk to somebody, or you need to go talk to somebody, versus saying, okay, here's what I've struggled with and what I decided to do about it. And I think then too, it's incumbent upon me to measure some of the outcomes, it's not just like effort. It is some of the outcomes. So are these athletes getting better? Am I doing work at helping them make more free throws? Has that percentage increased? And so it's not like, does the team show up at a good clip if I'm leading like a pre-performance seminar? I mean, this matters, but do I actually see their performance increasing? And so right when the whistle blows and we start the match, are they coming out firing and ready? So I hold myself to that standard. I think that's critical for our field to hold it to. It's both safety and it's also accountability and showing the benefit of it.
I agree. And I think that's relevant to almost any profession is there's a difference between awareness and are you actually making a difference in whatever you're aiming to do. I don't wanna say that as in sports psychology or anything that, you give advice, but maybe that's how a lot of people see it. So, as we wrap up, as we close down, Dillon, what is the best performance advice you've ever gotten, and who was it from?
Well, yeah, the way you asked it, I was ready to answer, and then the way you asked it it's gonna be the same
Oh,
answer,
wait,
but
what
I'm
were you
just
gonna say? What were you gonna
well, it's the
say?
same. I mean, I thought you were just gonna say, like, what's a piece of advice that you would just give? What's one? But
Okay,
then you said, what's one that I've been given and who said it? It's the same. The answer is the same, but
okay.
the framing around it is gonna be a smidge different. But the way you asked it, like, we're gonna go for it here. I think, Megan, we have to learn to love ourselves from a real true deeply rooted place. I think the love or care, the compassion we tend to offer others is not often reflected back into ourselves. I think we hold ourselves to standards, and if we were to take our internal dialogue and sit it next to us, and that person walked with us for like the last 2 weeks, do we look at them and we say, gosh, thank you for being so supportive and kind. You are warm and empathic, and you believe I have what it takes. And so you challenge me to go do difficult things, and you know that I'm not always going to succeed. And then the moment I fail, you don't shame me. You say, gosh, you did it. You worked and I'm so proud of you for that. Let's go do it again. For most of us, that voice next to us is actually like critical and harsh and biting. And it's trying to make us not show up today because it's afraid that we're going to get found out. Like, you're going to fail and it's going to be embarrassing. And so you should just not show up today. And by the way, you're not tall enough or handsome enough. You're not pretty enough. You're not thin enough. You're not strong enough, fast enough, smart enough, fill it in. We all have these thought processes. If we look at a teammate or a friend or a kiddo, we would never, you think about an infant trying to learn to walk and they fall. We would never shame them. Like, gosh, how embarrassing. You just fell in front of everybody. Actually, you should just stay down. Why don't you roll out of this room, out of sight, and just go hot? We would never do that. We're proud of them for trying again and standing back up and going to do the work. But that's how we treat ourselves. So I think we must develop a love for ourselves. And then I think it's from that place that we're then able to love sport. We're able to love others well.
I think you just outsimplified maybe all the frameworks that we talked about today,
Okay.
'cause it
Yep.
really does, but it boils down to that. We all have bad days. We all have bad weeks. We all are, I think, more critical on ourselves than we ever are on other people around us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to be able to stop that thought process, to recognize it's happening and to say, is this really who I am? Is this who I believe I am? Or and how do I change that? I mean, I think that is to your point, that is the framework that no matter who you are or what organization you're in is going to get you where you want to be.
That's right. Yeah.
Dillon, thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge and really, and this isn't an easy topic. I mean, I know you talk about it a lot, but for a lot of people, like we said, this is not an easy thing to talk about. So
Mm.
I think we've had some good revelations, and I think we've given folks a lot of great insight. Again, athlete or not, of why we need to continue these conversations. And now that we have this awareness, where can we go? So thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, Megan, likewise.
Thanks for spending time with us in the middle. If today's story caught your attention, drop a subscribe, share the episode, follow us on social media, and remember, it ain't over till it's over.